Hello? Let's see what I get through today. Hopefully not repeating myself the entire way. I feel I've begun to do. So she starts here talking about the good-bad binary. This chapter explores what is perhaps the most effective adaptation of racism in recent history, the good/bad binary. Okay. The good/bad frame is a false dichotomy. All people hold prejudices, especially across racial lines in a society deeply divided by race. I can be told that everyone is equal by my parents. I can have friends of color, and I may not tell racist jokes, yet I'm still affected by the forces of racism as a member of society in which racism is the bedrock. Of course, the answer here is yes and no. Affected in some ways, but not necessarily in every action you do, in every view you have, in every friend you make, in every word that comes out of your mouth, and every idea that flashes through your head. Not everything. You can be affected, but that doesn't mean you are controlled. It doesn't mean that you can't be more than the systems you are born into and take part of. Then she starts critiquing this viewpoint. Okay, so she's talking about the idea that a racist viewpoint is bad, a non-racist viewpoint is good. So what she's talking about is the line between unracism and racism. I think on the triangle, there's this line between unracism and racism, and unracism and anti-racism. And anti-racism and racism are on a single line. So it is the opposite line to the corner is the racist line, right? Is the line which says, there is a system here. The opposite point is unracist, right? Or is unsystemic, is unsexist, is unclassist, and so on, which is the ideal that someone like me endeavors to meet, where the whole system itself is revealed as something of an illusion and a mistake, and we are able to move beyond our position or our color or our birthright in order to be judged and judge others only on our individuality. Now, of course, this is hard and perhaps a pipe dream and whatnot. But what she's really talking about here is she is disliking the view that, hey, if I pronounce a racist viewpoint, then that's bad, right? The idea that if unracist is the ideal, the good ideal here, that to have a racist viewpoint, to have a view that race, it matters, then, okay, so if unracist, the view that race doesn't matter is the good, then the bad must be, racist view, a view that says race matters. And again, we get into trouble here between racist and anti-racist. Like, racist is to believe that, one race is different than another, and there are intrinsic beliefs in there. There are intrinsic differences between me and someone of Irish blood, or for an example. And that these differences matter in some way in how we judge people or treat them. The anti-racist viewpoint says that this is true, but that such differences are socially constructed. And that between me and an Irish person, or me and a Chinese person, or me and an Iranian person, then there are differences in how we treat each other, and especially in America, between someone of black and white racial typings. Then there are differences in the way we treat each other, and we have created these differences through our social activities. We live in these because of the social realm we live in. And the argument for why race matters in a racist view and an anti-racist view is different, but they agree on the idea that race matters. And yet, from the point of view where the ideal, the perfect, is unracist views, then to even acknowledge racism seems bad. To say, hey, it's one thing to stand in front of someone and say, like, I don't see race, I don't see color. And whether you fail or succeed in that, the idea is at least that you are trying not to see color, and that is something to reach for. But it is another thing entirely to stand in front of someone and say, I see your race, I see your color, I see your blackness, your whiteness, and it matters and means something to me. And, I think that from an unracist, idealized viewpoint, that seems bad. And that's what she's talking about here, that even to say, hey, I have, like, if I'm talking about my friends, I'm like, well, I have my black friend, I have my Japanese friend, I have my Hmong friend, I have my Mexican friend, I have my Chilean friend and whatnot. Then there seems something disreputable about that. There seems something mean, because I'm talking about my Mexican friend. I'm like, is that how you see me? As your Mexican friend? Is that how you see me, as the token black friend? Is that how you see me, as, your white friend? I'm like, no, that is an insult in a certain way to say that I think of you in this manner. When if I'm your friend, or if I'm a family member, or I'm someone then I want you to think of me as an individual. I want you to see me as I am, not the skin color or my mode of speech or my manners. It's about how I think, how I feel. How am I your friend? Am I your enemy? Am I kind? Am I sweet? Am I mean? Am I cruel? Am I bored? Am I in despair? Am I hateful? Am I happy? So, in my view, the acknowledgement of, I see what she's trying to say here. Like, she's saying that just because I recognize that my friend is black does not mean that I am saying something bad about my friend. Just because I recognize my friend is white does not mean I am saying something bad about my friend. It is just that I am acknowledging this world we live in, this situation we find ourselves in, which we want to escape, in which we endeavor to destroy this whole system, but at the same time we have not succeeded yet. And so perhaps there are unresolved tensions between two people because of the racial differences, or because they do not talk about race, and this may cause problems. And she thinks it does. I think it can definitely do so in certain situations. And we can make assumptions here. Like, well, I assumed you like this kind of music. I assume you're attracted to this type of person. I assume that you found it hard in school. I assume that when you wrote your college essay, you included the fact that you came from certain circumstances which were hard for you, because I know you did. And yet I may not ask that of you. I may say that is in part of our relationship and our friendship I don't feel comfortable entering into. And the question arises, I don't feel comfortable asking about that. I want to focus on who we are and how we enjoy each other, right? Like, I'm going to, okay, I'll talk to you about, the cards you play, or the TV shows you watch, or what you think about the news, or how your car is doing. That doesn't mean that I'll ask, well, how is your sick sister doing? How are you feeling after the divorce, right? And there are many reasons why we might not enter into it. I think that there are many complex reasons. There is certainly the social taboo in certain times, I would say. I'm going to say, well, if I go up and ask a friend, well, how do you feel about the crackdown on illegal immigration? How do you feel about ICE taking women and children from the arms of their home? How do you feel about dad going to work and then just never coming back, and you don't know where he is, and then you try to get him on the phone, and then he's moved around to three different places, and then all of a sudden he's in San Salvador, and you're like, what happened? He didn't do anything wrong. He just existed here. And if I talk to someone who is, white and right-wing, then I'm going to expect a certain reaction. And if I talk to someone who is right-wing but also like Mexican, then I'm going to go, well, this is maybe a more complicated topic to talk to. If I talk to someone based on the position I think they're in, then I may go, I don't know if I want to enter into this. I may be fraught. I don't feel like I have to begin. And yet, sometimes we should have the hard conversations. Sometimes we should ask ourselves, I feel problematic asking about your thoughts, or I feel problematic inquiring about this situation I know you have. And sometimes that is because I'm talking to you and you obviously don't want to talk about it. I mean, look, if I go out with a bunch of my friends and we go, play cards or go watch a movie or something, and I know one of them is dealing with like a cancer from one of their relatives, sometimes they want to talk about it and sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's I don't want to talk about the divorce. I don't want to talk about my brother. I don't want to talk about the fact that I can't get promoted at my job. I just want to have fun and get through the day. But you ask yourself, right, in these situations, why am I not mentioning this? For me, I have a tendency in everything I do to feel uncomfortable in breaking boundaries, right? To feel uncomfortable in asking questions I feel people aren't answering. Or I tend to ask questions in an indirect way, like instead of asking my friend, why don't we hang out anymore? I'll be like, I'll send a message like, hey, do you want to play League of Legends? Hey, do you want to go see a movie? And then I'll see, do they reply? And we meet up, and maybe they don't reply. They read it, left me unread, and I'm like, well, I guess that's done. I guess there's something else going along with them. And, next year I'll try again. But, entering into that situation, I'm gonna go, hey, what's going on? What's up with your life? What's happening? That's not something I'm comfortable in as an individual. And so I'm going to allow people to bring up a topic first, or I'm going to suggest a topic indirectly and see if they respond, see if they're open to a discussion of this. And I'm going to judge based on who they are and how they sound to me and my feelings at the time and how much energy I have, right? If I am dead tired, I am not going to enter into a hard conversation. If I'm energized, I might enter into a hard conversation. And she's trying to say, at least as it regards racism, there is a tendency among, well, she says the white viewpoint, but I think it may hold in any discussions where whiteness as a racist power structure comes into play, right? Because by questioning whiteness, as she calls it, you're not just questioning whiteness, you are questioning the power structure, you're questioning the way things are, and you're saying there are undercurrents we are not prepared to investigate. There are undercurrents we haven't talked about. There are pieces of information which I am reading from this situation which you may not, and I'm reading something racist going on here. And how do I enter into that conversation? Or which part of the social taboo about talking about racism is my fault versus some other person's fault? Whose burden is it to enter into a conversation? And so what she's talking about here with white frailty I think, is that feeling which comes about when someone stands up and says, well, you're being racist right now, or I feel this is racism, or the cop stopped me because I'm black, and you standing here and going, okay, how do I enter this conversation, right? How do I respond to that? Because sometimes, yeah, the cop stopped you because you're black. And then other times, the cop stopped you because your taillight is out, or because your car looks like it's going to explode and is full of rust spots. Right? Or, yeah, the cop stopped you because I've been in your car and you are constantly going 15 miles over the speed limit, so eventually, yes, the cops are going to stop you. This isn't a surprise. Sort of thing. And yet the person may not be prepared to deal with that, talk about it. And I've certainly had conversations with black friends where I talk about racist issues and then they get a little either tired of it or they start repeating themselves, and we start repeating ourselves in the conversation and it's not going anywhere. Or, one or the other of us begins to be uncomfortable with how far it goes or what we're talking about, or it takes time to sort of comprehend what's happening, or I'm saying something which is critical of one race or another, and I have to gently massage this so as not to offend anybody. And the feeling generally, I think, is that not necessarily that talk about racism is forbidden, but that talk about racism threatens to offend people. Okay, so and this is why. This is part of the problem with anti-racism as practiced, I think. In order to talk about racism, you need to talk about the entire system itself, the black and the white side, the good and the bad side. Why you make certain decisions, why you have certain opinions, why you have these prejudices, why there are these facts on the ground about, health disparities. How we ended up here in this history, should I feel guilty? Should I not feel guilty? These are, is this an issue where racism is the primary fault here? Or is this an issue where racism is used to cover up some other problem? There are complexities involved. And it can be problematic because there is this focus on the anti-racism side that where whiteness is perceived as the power, and because anti-racism is an anti-system movement, that the claim is essentially that whiteness is bad. And she's talking about this good-bad dichotomy here and saying, well, we shouldn't perceive that all talks about racism is bad. We should be able to talk, we should feel more comfortable at talking about racism. We should challenge ourselves to question the racist structure and ideas we have. But in order to do this effectively, you cannot just stand up and say, this is bad, 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 right? And this is what happens, I think. You vilify the opponent. Again, she talks in the beginning here about, well, whiteness is about whiteness. The power structure of whiteness is supported by belief in individuality and objectivity. And I'm going, okay, that's like ancient philosophy, like ancient Greek philosophy, all the way there. This is like reading Marcus Aurelius, that we have the capability of reasoning and of understanding each other. And when you vilify whiteness, there is this tendency in the movement, I feel, to end up saying that all European philosophy is flawed at its very heart. And that is a much larger discussion than mere racism deals with. Is there reason? Can we understand each other? To what extent is individuality wanted or needed, or how should we support it? How is it figured out today? Are we really individuals? To what degree are we members of the society? Can we change the society? Do we change the society from in or out? How many aspects are there to a society and actions? And what happens is, by holding a moral stance, you have a claim about good or bad. You can have a meta moral idea, which has nothing to do with good or bad, right? Where you say, well, this system has two poles of good and bad, and this other system has two poles of good and bad. But I don't say that there is a good or bad. I just say that these systems say, and that's a meta ethical view. But when you have an ethical view below that meta, and you're saying that there is a good and bad, there is a way you should or should not act, there is a better world we can achieve, then what happens is you tend to place things in a black and white spectrum. And racism does this by saying whiteness is good, black is bad. And then what can happen is anti-racism says white is bad, but then they have to say that black is good. And I don't think that is always the case. I think there's this focus on the negative. And I've been talking about blackness and black friends, my prejudices, but many of the words and ideas I'm espousing are essentially negative. I'm like, well, you're more likely to be poor, or more likely to have experienced violence, or more likely to have a hard time finding a job, and so on and so on, right? But there are positives to be found in as well. You are more, frankly, you're more likely to have positive experiences with dance and music. Like I've never danced a day in my life. I am the epitome of the awkward white boy here. I find that certain types of music I simply don't vibe with. I didn't grow up with them, and I'm uncomfortable with the ideas or feelings they espouse. But other people I know are not, and they are able to transcend some of the issues I have with certain modes of existence. And then I and my own self have access to modes of existence they find difficult to deal with. I'll sit alone in my room and read a 500-page book in one day, sort of bit. And, I've noticed my black friends, as it is, they tend to have a more raucous relationship with the family, but also a more involved family. There tends to be a feeling, that the world is out to get you, but also a pride in the fact that you've made it and survived. That you can keep continuing on against terrible odds. And these are positives to be found, which I think are something that should be talked about perhaps more. But like, how do you, if you want to say whiteness is bad, then what is good? What do you replace it with? And there is a tendency to, by vilifying the opponent, exalt their enemies. That is, say, well, racism and this power structure is bad, so anyone against them is good, right? We want a utopia. We want perfection. We want a socialist movement. We want a communist movement. We want to tear down every statue of every slave owner ever. We want to rewrite the history books to show and explain how terrible activities have been done to the Native Americans, and so on. We want more black inventors to be talked about. We want more Eastern philosophy to be shown in schools. We want a necessary class on like Native American history from Canada to Argentina, and how we live in a land where great empires rose and fell and invented writing independently, and of which we have little experience compared to what we learn of the great Eurasian continent and whatnot. And this is a complicated situation because whiteness, as it is relatively, it's a practice, right? There is a long history of, hey, this is European Enlightenment values, and we'll continue with that. And we're going to sort of ignore, like industrialization, right? Industrialization, good. Yes, but also like coal lung from working in the coal mines, and children losing fingers because they worked in factories where there were not adequate safety measures, you know, poisoning the Thames, the Black London fog, acid rain, microplastics. There are good and bad effects of anything. There is nothing entirely bad. Someone benefited in some way from almost every action. Is a view one can have, right? There is a dichotomy in it. But I think it is also possible for everyone to benefit or for everyone to lose. And it's not quite clear how we keep us all from losing yet. Okay, so this bit is interesting, I think. She says, for example, I was working with a group of educators who had been meeting regularly for at least 8 sessions. The group was composed of the equity teams for a public school system, self-selected by people who wanted to support equity efforts in their schools. I had just finished an hour-long presentation titled Seeing the Water, Whiteness in Daily Life. This presentation is designed to make visible the relentless messages of white superiority and the resulting and inevitable internalization of these messages for white people. The room appeared to be with me, open and receptive, with many nodding along in agreement. Then a white teacher raised her hand and told a story about an interaction she had as she drove alongside a group of parents protesting the achievement gap in her school. She then proceeded to imitate one mother in particular who offended her. "You don't understand our child," this mother had called out to her as she drove by. By the stereotypical way the white teacher imitated the mother, we all knew that the mother was black. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath at her imitation, which was bordering on racial mockery. Well, the teacher's concluding point was that, on reflection, she came to realize that the mother was right and that she really didn't understand children of color. The emotional thrust of the story was her umbrage at the mother for making this assumption. For the room, the emotional impact was on her stereotypical imitation of an angry black woman. So then we enter into an interesting bit. And this is where we talk about, social pressure and expectations. Right? So this girl is this teacher is telling a story about a parent, and she imitates the parent, and she imitates the parent in such a way that is obvious the parent is black, right? And how is this done isn't exactly clear, right? But I don't know, the accent, probably, and this accent is associated with a certain racial group and way of speaking in Ebonics and whatnot. Or maybe she she was like showing braids or something. Or maybe it was the name of the parent. Who knows? And then it's interesting because you can understand the point of view of the white teacher here, if you give her the benefit of the doubt, right? So the negative view is obviously what the author is talking about here. The negative view is that this teacher was offended that a black woman was daring to call out to her. And that was the emotional story people got. But a positive, or a positive view of that may be that the woman is, the teacher here is imitating, she's telling a story about a girl, about a student, and then she's imitating her, indicating that she's a person of color because it is relevant to the discussion she's making. Right? So this is a problem, I think, that we face when we end up with social taboos. To what extent do we mention racial issues? Right? And this is something I think members of my family can get mad at on the news. They look at the news and it'll say, the news doesn't say, woman killed, man killed, shooting done. It's like black man killed by cops. But black child involved in gunfights, or the Asian man, the victim of crime, or white girl involved in drive-by, right? Like the racial issues will be mentioned, and then you're going, okay, why is race important here? Like, why are you mentioning it? Are you trying to send a message saying that race matters at this point? Right? Like if somebody gets in a car accident, or there's two gangsters fighting, and it says, two black gangsters fight. I'm like, why is black relevant here? And they could be two white gangsters, and the message is still the same. It's two people involved in an underground organization which is typically violent, a gang. With gang signs and an honor society and a method of organization which is anti-establishmentarian and probably involved in something illegal. Otherwise, it would just be a neighborhood organization, wouldn't be referred to as a gang, sort of bit. Maybe they wear special colors. Who knows? And like when I'm talking and I'm explaining, well, this is my black friend, this is my white friend. When is that relevant? It's relevant here in what I'm talking about, right? In this White Frailty book and in the racism dynamic we're investigating by talking to a camera. But in 90% of my daily life, it seems like it would be disingenuous to say, hey, I was talking to my friend and they said this and they said that. Sometimes I'll even forget. I'll go, why do I mention that it was a he or a she, right? Because I'll feel that I'm imparting information and he or she isn't important or relevant to what's going on here. Or I'll feel that if I say he or she, if I say that my black friend or my white friend, or the kid or the elder, whatever the definition of the group I'm putting them into. If I mention that definition, then I'm imparting more information, right? I'm saying this is relevant in some way. Or I'm saying that I'm messaging and saying that I care about this in some way. And I'm going, sometimes it doesn't matter. And sometimes it does matter. And sometimes when it does matter and you mention it, then it is seen as dangerous and insulting. Like if I imitate an Indian accent or I'm relating to an idea about my Indian boss, is that racist? I mean, he sounds like that. Am I supposed to do it like a white guy says it? I think that's not nearly as funny, first of all, because it doesn't deal with these taboo boundaries we have. If I'm talking to a coworker, then imitating my boss's way of speaking engages them more in the joke and the talk. If I am, explaining something and saying, well, a teacher said this to me, a parent said this to me, then how much of them do I imitate? How much of them do I show, right? When is it relevant? When is it not? To mention race as a point of information relating to a certain person, right? I think that if I, during this discussion, had never had, when I'm talking about a black friend, white friend, Asian friend, whatever, if I had never mentioned their race, would the same information have gotten across? Would there be an assumption from the way I talk about them or from the information I'm using that they have, that they are of a certain race? I think it's a little complex here. But I do understand what she's getting at in the first part of this chapter, where she's saying we need to be able to talk about race and overcome the social taboo where race itself is a forbidden topic. But what can happen, I think, is you can talk about race in a way which other people find insulting, which other people find annoying, which other people find mocking. And this then becomes a entirely new mode of speech. How do we mention, if we break the social taboo and then talk about race, how do we talk about race in a way which acknowledges it without being performative? Because there is a performative aspect that can happen here when you say, like she talks about it here. I think she uses it, frankly. She's like, well, I have a white viewpoint and I see the world through a white lens and I can't escape that. And I'm so sorry that I must see that I don't understand what the issue is here. Or I'm so sorry that I benefit from these things. And she says she's not, but the feeling you get when reading, and perhaps I'm projecting from folk I know and folk I've seen on TV and folk I've talked to and whatnot, books I've read, where we can end up talking about race in a way which is disingenuous, right? Because for example, I think if you are black and you start talking about race, then you can mention positive things about blackness. But if you're a white and you start talking about race, it is very dangerous or very awkward sometimes to mention positive things about whiteness. At the same time, it can be very awkward to mention negative things about blackness. And yet it's very, very easy to mention negative things about whiteness, I think, in the methods of discussion we have. And again, anti-racism is an anti-establishmentarian view. So whiteness bad, easy. Blackness good, easy. Blackness bad, that's a little harder. Whiteness good, that's forbidden. And yet from a more expansive viewpoint, in that triangle of ideas, where you distance yourself from the absolute dichotomy of good and bad, black and white, positive and negative, and you see shades of gray and complexities in the way humans live and interact with each other, then we end up being in a position where we can question race itself and how we utilize race, and this is where you actually get to the issues. By having some sort of balance of ideas, balance of the triangle. Okay. So then she says, as this white teacher told her story, she says, as this story came to a close, I had a decision to make. Should I act with integrity and point out what was racially problematic about the story? After all, making racism visible was literally what I had been hired to do. Further, several African American teachers in the room had certainly noticed the reinforcement of a racist stereotype. As diplomatically as possible, I said, I understand that you gained valuable insight from that interaction, and I thank you for sharing that insight with us. And I'm going to ask you to consider not telling that story in that way again. When she immediately began to protest, I interrupted her to continue. I am offering you a teachable moment, I said, and I am only asking you that you try to listen with openness. I then laid out what was racially problematic about how she told the story and offered her a way to share her learning without reinforcing racist stereotypes. Where the same story could easily be told and the same conclusions drawn without the racially charged imitation of the mother. She defensively interrupted me several times, but eventually appeared to be listening. Shortly after this intervention, we took a break. Several African-American teachers came up to thank me, as did one white teacher who found my intervention refreshing and much-needed example of how to break with white solidarity. Several white people also approached to let me know how upset the teacher was and that she was quitting the group. Thus is the power of the good-bad binary and how it informs white frailty. Even a white person on an equity team participating in a class based on the premise that racism is structured into our society and that white complicity is an inevitable result could not handle feedback on how her racism was unintentionally manifesting itself. And yes, that is something that happens. So my thoughts about, this book and the ideas are kind of complex because I definitely criticize certain ideas here, but at the same time I recognize many of the events she's talking about, and it may not be racist events I've experienced in the same way, but it'd be the same. When someone does something and then you explain how that was problematic, or you explain how they were wrong, or you explain how to do better, and they react defensively and say, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand why you're blaming me. I don't understand why you're attacking me. And I'm sitting there going, I am not attacking you. I am being honest. Perhaps I should have dealt with this in a more obtuse fashion. I should have come around very gently. But at a certain point, it's like, how responsible am I for your emotional frailty? Like, how responsible am I in a discussion for your issues with taking feedback? And for me to ask that question, for me to have the audacity to say that, I feel that I need to reflect upon myself and be able to take criticism myself. That is to stand to give a viewpoint to someone and then have them accuse you of attacking them for giving your viewpoint is something that happens all the time in all sorts of places, at work, at school, at home. Right? When you're trying to explain to your brother why what he did was wrong or bad, and he's just sitting there going like, I didn't do anything. Why are you attacking me? Why are you blaming me? I'm like, I am blaming you because you are wrong. Right? Or look, I'm not angry at you. I'm just trying to explain. Or look, there's something going on here I don't understand, so I'm trying to drag it out of you. Right? And the troubles we can have when we are trying to have a conversation with somebody who is not interested in a good faith conversation, trying to have a conversation with somebody who is very, very sure of their prejudices and their ideas and how they see themselves, someone who is unable or unwilling or feels this deep, terrible existential dread upon the asking of certain questions is a very fraught experience, a very frustrating experience. And, this is something that I see it, and I personally endeavor not to do that. I personally endeavor to take my criticism, and yet I do have times where I act, I get mad. Someone tells me something, and I'll get mad. I'll get annoyed. But that's partially, like how do I deal with that, right? And that ends up a personal question of personal philosophy, which is sort of outside the gist of this book, right? But sometimes I'll give me a minute, let me calm down, or you know what, I'm angry at you right now. I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna go to sleep, I'm gonna wake up, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow, after I've had some time to let it stew in my head. But I think that it is very, very, very common for people not to do that. Very common for people to refuse to apologize or refuse to see what they did was wrong. And yet it is also sometimes the case that this exact event reinforces itself in the opposite direction. Someone tells me I am wrong, and I say, no, I am not wrong. Someone tells me I have done bad, and I say, no, I have not done bad. Someone tells me that I am attacking them with my words, and I say, I am not attacking you with my words. You are wrong. You are too sensitive. Or you are taking meaning from this I am not injecting into it. Or you are intentionally misrepresenting my words. And so, there's a balance to be found here between criticism and your own confidence in yourself. So I think this is necessary because it goes back to the beginning. She criticizes whiteness for individuality, and what can happen there, if you have a culture that criticizes individuality, then you end up making collectivism positive. And all of a sudden, anyone's viewpoint out there means more to you than your viewpoint does yourself. All of a sudden, the fact that you made someone mad, or the fact that someone called you out for being racist is seen as an extremely valid claim and attack, and you must show how sorry you are. You must exemplify your willingness to suffer for the sins you have committed, and so on, because of collectivism, because the collective, or someone in the collective, an individual out there, or a bunch of people on the internet are telling you what you should do or how you should believe or why you're bad. And if individuality itself is bad, then denying the collective viewpoint is itself bad. And that's a danger that can happen. At the same time, too much individuality can also be bad. If you don't listen to anybody's point of view, if the entire world is telling you you're wrong as you light a nuke on fire, maybe you should stop and listen to them, right? There's this balance between I am myself alone and I am a member of society, and neither of those are the ultimate case. But again, this can be something that is difficult, I think, when we become involved in movements and beliefs. A social movement is just a religion in another name. A religion, technically speaking, is just a view of the world where there are certain foundational beliefs that cannot be questioned. What we call a religion usually has these foundational beliefs be involved in something like magic or God or spirits. But you can also have a religion in the same exact sense be involved in a social movement, in communism, or you're in the McCarthy, right? And you're pro-capitalism, or you're anti-sexism, you're pro-sexism, or you're all about the Israel, or you're all about Palestine, right? And these beliefs become religious beliefs that you must have, and that anyone who does not have these beliefs sees the world in the wrong way. The same can happen with any moral system. Killing is bad. Killing is okay. Thieving is bad. Well, actually, more important than thieving is staying alive so you can steal if you need bread to survive, right? And how do you dig down to the foundational beliefs? Religion tends to be very loud about its foundational beliefs. Here is God, here are the rules. But as well, social movements can be just as strong about their foundational beliefs. Racism can be strong about its foundational beliefs. This is black, this is white, one of them is better. Don't ever question that. At the same time, anti-racism can be religious in its beliefs. White is bad, don't even question that. I'm going, okay, what do you mean by whiteness? Well, I mean individuality, I mean originality, I mean the power structure of the world, of America that we've created. I mean the racial disparities. I'm going, okay, so you're talking about like a whole lot of various bits and pieces that make up whiteness, and let's make sure that we don't criticize everything there, right? Understand that there are individuals who are complex within that whole group. It's like, you know, it's just as absurd to say that, you know, every white person is terrible or is guilty as it is to say that every black person is going to commit a crime. Right? These stereotypes themselves are dangerous, are problematic. And partially this comes from the whole mix-up between skin color and culture, and how much of whiteness is skin culture, how much of whiteness is white culture, and so on. How much of blackness is skin color, how much of blackness is black culture, and that's really, that's a complicated discussion. Okay. She talks about colorblind claims. Include the following: I don't see color. I don't care if you're pink, purple, or polka dotted. Race doesn't have any meaning to me. Everyone struggles, but if you work hard, focusing on race is what divides us. And people are respectful to me, I'm respectful to them, regardless of race. I'm not racist. I'm from Canada. I was picked on because I was white / I grew up poor, so I don't have race privilege. Okay, so sometimes, yes, I'm like, I agree with some of these, some of them not. I'm like, I don't see color. Yeah, there are most definitely times in my life when I don't see color. And there are most definitely times in my life when I do see color. Depends on the issue. I don't care if you're pink, purple, or polka dotted. You know, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes the surroundings I'm in are screaming at me, this is a racially charged situation. Better pay attention. Other times, this is a situation where race is totally unimportant. Like if I'm in a business meeting, right, it doesn't matter what race we are. It's like, hey, do you want to make the deal for whatever the goods on service for sale are or not? Like, this is a totally commercial interaction. We could both be blind worms, and it's still all about money. Other times, it's like, okay, well, we're at like a certain, I don't know, festival, or we're in a certain type of club. I haven't gone out much recently into racially charged situations, let's say. I stay in my room probably a little too much in the last year or so. And oh God, I think I have trouble with some of these because, again, the place I grew up in, the place I live in today is about as racially mixed as you can get in the country. So I'm like, I can't walk down the street without seeing 3 people of a different color. So if I say like, well, this is a racially charged situation, it's like, it's not as common, I think, to experience. Whereas, like, okay, so if I think of like bits and pieces, but then it gets complicated, like, because I've been in places in Asia, for example, where you look around and every single person you see for literally 10,000 people, they're all Asian. You go to the beach in Kaohsiung, and you're like, okay, yeah, it's a bunch of Taiwanese people, right? You're wandering around the back streets of Bianhua, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of lost, and I've been with this motorcycle taxi for the last half hour. He's stopped and talked to like 4 people trying to find directions to where I want to go. Right, and then it's like, at what point, like how much of my interaction is, in that case, is racial and how much is cultural, right? If I go into a coffee shop and meet with some friends, or I learn that there's going to be a Yu-Gi-Oh card tournament somewhere, and I go and it's all people of one race. All right, that's very different if I'm in the United States and it's all people of one race versus if I'm in Vietnam. Or if I'm in Japan, it's all people of one race, because then I'm not just dealing with a racial issue, I'm dealing with an entirely different, entire culture issue, right? So, but even by myself, they look at me like, oh yeah, that's a foreigner, and that complicates the situation. But this seems, so that's one of the other sort of struggles I have with the racist and anti-racist viewpoint. It is a very, very, very American-centered idea. It's a very American-centric system and anti-system. Once it gets outside of America, then you get into, at the very least, issues like colonialism, which complicate it. You know, if people are respectful to me, I'm respectful to them, regardless of race. Yeah. I'm not racist. I'm from Canada. Okay, that is a colorblind claim that has a problem. I'm like, I know there are issues in Canada. Maybe less issues, and maybe you don't have the same issues quite. But certainly, you know, there are First Nations tensions up there that I know of. At the same time, you know, that is something to be involved in. Like, if I go to a country where there are two ethnic groups that don't like, if I'm in the middle of the Balkans, right, and there are two ethnic groups that don't like each other, which has happened, and I go, and then I'm like, I'm standing there going, I am not part of this. I literally cannot see the difference between you two groups. Is it, like, I don't know, does one of you tend to have a bigger nose? Like, what's going on here? Right, I literally cannot tell the difference between your two languages. Right, and I'm going. So you can enter into a place and be colorblind. You can enter into a place and be culturally blind. You can enter a place and be unable to tell the difference, or only have a very vague understanding of the tensions between Britain and Wales, or between Britain and Scotland. For example, or like in Mexico, there can be tensions between the more indigenous folk who live up in the mountains and the hills, and the more urban folk living in the city, and there tends to be racial differences as well there. You know, one of them looks Mexican, the other one is 4 feet tall, and I notice these things as I'm wandering through. But I don't really understand what they mean. I don't really understand the history. So I think you can be colorblind in multiple ways. You can be colorblind in a way which is disingenuous. Well, I don't really see black, but, you know, in the way I act differently towards black people. And you can be colorblind in certain situations. Hey, when I'm in this situation, color is important. I know. I talk about it. In this situation, color is not important, and bringing it up would be inappropriate. You know, you can be colorblind in a way which is actually blind. You can be colorblind in a way where you are sort of unaware of the issues that should be happening here, or could be happening, or the stories and whatnot. And I think this can happen, for example, like if you are some white person from the middle of nowhere in the country, and you come to town and you meet like your first black person, and this happens even today, right? Be like, I grew up somewhere and everyone around me was all the same color. I remember there was a girl like a Native American reservation who was like, I didn't see my first black man until I was 14. Or was it a white man? I didn't see my first white man until I was 14. It was one of those. She told me. She's like, yeah, I grew up on the reservation and it was all natives around us, and you know, so I didn't really know what that was. And so you get degrees of color blindness, perhaps, like degrees of red-green color blindness. And yet, I understand what she's saying here, right? That it is important to be able to tell when colorblind statements are just used as a cover, or just used as an excuse. Well, you know, I don't see color. I don't see color, but the laws I pass are totally and completely focused on income-based differences, or I mean, they just happen to match up very well with the colored parts of the city, you know, or I need to find department is going to focus on crime in these parts of the city because that's where crime is highest. And they just happen to be the parts of the city where all the dark-skinned folk live, where all the Mexicans live or whatnot. And yet I'm colorblind. I'm going, and you're looking at that and you're reading the news and you're going, okay, for someone who's colorblind, you seem to be talking about something that matches up with color very strongly. And I think it's important to call that out. And that's what she's focusing on here. I tend to criticize and be defensive, of course, because I try to see the good, the positive side of any interaction. Again, which can be emotionally dangerous, because you end up talking to the worst people or reading up the worst histories and going, okay, let me try and pull positive out of murder, death, despair. Let me try to find the light, the spark in the darkness. And sometimes you do. Sometimes you kind of feel like you're making it up. Okay. She says, in my work to unravel the dynamics of racism, I have found a question that never fails me. This question is not, is this claim true or is it false? We will never come to an agreement on a question that sets up an either or dichotomy on something as sensitive as racism. Instead, I ask, how does this claim function in the conversation? If we apply this question to these two sets of narrative, one colorblind and the other color celebrate, we see that all these claims ultimately function in a similar way. They all exempt the person from any responsibility or participation in the problem. They take race off the table and they close rather than open any further exploration. In so doing, they protect the racial status quo. And yeah, that is a good point to make, I think. Well, we often make claims or held beliefs which are moral. They may in fact be true. And yet the way to apply them may be more complex than we think. The sky is blue. Yes, the sky is blue. Why is the sky blue? Water droplets are suspended in the air. Okay, well, why is the sky different colors of blue? Well, the angle of the sun. Why is the sky purple? Why is the sky red? What are those white things in the sky? Well, there's a cloud and that sunset and it changes the angle. And that's why the sky's red sometimes. And so saying the sky is blue is a true statement, but it's also a very simple statement. And saying that I'm not racist, I'm from Canada is true in a sense. You are from Canada, and you probably don't have as many black and white or racial issues or history with those issues as America. But that doesn't mean that racism doesn't still affect you in some way. It doesn't mean that you haven't entered into a society in America here where black and white dichotomy racism is of importance. It doesn't mean that you don't have some stereotypes in your head that, hey, there's a lot of black gangsters I've seen in movies. Sort of bit. And so, claiming that you don't see race may be true, but if you are using, I think she's pointing out here is that if you are using that claim to shut down speech, then this is disingenuous. Because a claim, logically speaking, is not only about its truth or falsity, but about its relevance to the equation. And there are times when speaking certain truths distract from figuring out or dealing with problems. There are also times when we speak something and we think it's a truth, but it's not, and that needs to be challenged. I don't see race. Well, let me show you several ways in which you do. And so we're talking about white frailty, and the feeling I get from this section is she's saying that oftentimes I'll talk to white people about racism, and they'll come out and say, well, I don't see racism. I'm not racist. And there's several responses to that, right? Do you say, oh, okay, I guess you're not racist. I guess we shouldn't talk about this. I guess there's no point in talking about this. Or do you say, okay, you're not racist, but I still have some questions that maybe you can help me with your non-racist viewpoint, and let's see if we can figure out the answers together. I understand, I understand you're not racist, but I want you to prove it to me because I'm not sure I believe you. I understand you're not racist, but that is the topic of the conversation. So for now, pretend that you are. Even if you don't see color, are you capable of seeing color? Like, there are complex ways to get through here. But I do see her point that sometimes this happens with this is socialization with human beings, just straight up, with politeness. Sometimes you ask someone a question and they smile politely and don't reply, and you get the message they don't want to talk about that right now. The same thing can be, oh, I'm colorblind. They don't want to talk about that right now. And she's saying that sometimes we should talk about it. We shouldn't, that there is this tendency in the white viewpoint and the viewpoint of those who are powerful to not question power, to not question the system, and that reinforces the system. Well, yes and no. It does. In the absence of movement of anyone, it reinforces the boundaries of the system, I would say. If we look at the specific complexities here, right, it reinforces the walls around the system. It reinforces the castle walls, not the city inside. And this is perhaps white frailty, the frailty part she's talking about, that you may have a hard outer shell but a soft, gooey center. And once you pierce that hard outer shell, then all of a sudden people become very upset and worried and injured by racist talk because they aren't emotionally, prepared or tough, right? This isn't something they thought they'd ever have to really talk about. And now they do, where they have to question themselves, and they haven't entered into that era of self-doubt yet. Or not. Okay. And then we get to... This is interesting here to me. Someone who claims to have been taught to treat everyone the same is simply telling me that he or she doesn't understand socialization. It is not possible to treat everyone the same, as she says, we can be told, and often are told, to treat everyone the same, but we cannot successfully be taught to do so because human beings are not objective. Okay, and what she's doing here is doing exactly what she was talking about before. She is saying a truth. It is not possible to treat everyone the same. And yeah, as far as we can tell, it is not possible to treat everyone the same because everyone is an individual. But that does not mean that it is in a racist sense. It does not mean that you must treat everyone racially. You cannot treat everyone the same. It does not mean that you must treat with everyone as regards their race. It may be very possible to have friends who are of different races, and you treat each one of them differently, and their particular race does not enter into that equation. Right? So-and-so likes these sorts of jokes. So-and-so doesn't like these jokes. So-and-so tends to speak glum. So-and-so tends to be the adventurous one. Ding, 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 ding. As you go down. And so she's using a truth to say, well, you cannot treat everyone the same. Therefore, to say that you do treat everyone the same in a racial sense is disingenuous. And no, it is not necessarily so. She says, someone who claims to have been taught to treat everyone the same is simply telling me that he or she doesn't understand socialization. And she is up here. The message I'm reading, right, is the anti-racist message of people standing up there on their high horse. I know a truth, and I'm going to use this truth to shut down any discussion. And the discussion is, if I have to treat people differently, then how do I treat them differently? Because the claim that I treat everyone in regards to their race, I treat all black people as if they are black, I treat all white people as if they are white, is itself a claim which the previous one, you cannot treat everyone the same, pushes against. I cannot treat everyone the same. Well, I must treat people as if they are white or black. I'm like, so I'm treating all white people the same. I'm treating all black people in the same manner. No. I'm going to treat. There's a bunch of black folk here. Some of them, nice suit, nice tie, shake your hand. Some of them, crackheads. Don't look them in the eye. Some of them, mom with a kid. Look, smile. Oh, look at how much fun they're having. Some of them, rapper selling CDs on the street. Hey, sir, how you doing? What's your music like? And there are more complexities in our society than mere race. This does not mean that racist views have disappeared. This does not mean that racism does not exist, but it does mean that racism need not control every aspect of our daily life. And any movement which is, either pro-system or anti-system, is going to stand there and say the world is seen through this system, and this is how we understand the world, and it is black and white and good and bad and A and B and no option C. You have 1, you have 0, and there is no decimal point number between any of those. And I'm going, no. You have complex numbers. You got the natural numbers, counting numbers, but there's complex numbers. There are, I don't remember all of them. There are the numbers which never repeat. For example, you have integers. You have percentages, 5%, 6%, many ways to interpret number. I should know the different numbers of types of number, but not off the top of my head. Okay. So what this here, I think, on page 79, just after page 77, she talked about, is an example of fight your enemy too long and you become your enemy. The same things you accuse your enemy of doing, you eventually end up doing yourself. In the same way that you say, well, white folk shut down discussions about racism that come from this direction, you end up, as an anti-racist system, shutting down questions about racism that come from a different direction. You do the same thing. You use a truth to color in all the nuances. Instead of looking at a picture of a sunset, you're saying, okay, we're going to use a blue crown for the sky because the sky is all blue. And I'm like, no, there's more complexities here. Okay, so this bit I think is something that is interesting. Okay, many people of color have told me that they initially tried to talk about racism with their white friends, but the friends got defensive or invalidated their experiences, so they stopped sharing their experiences. I don't think I've been defensive or invalidated experiences, but what I've definitely done is gone, how do I reply to that? And this, I think this might be a more of a me socialization issue, but like, I got friends be like, oh, I got stopped by the police for driving while black, and I'm like, that sucks. that shouldn't happen. Racism is bad. Like, how do I reply to this? How do I show my empathy? I've said that sucks. I said that's bad. And do you want to keep talking about it? Do you want to complain to me? Am I supposed to then ask you questions about this and how you feel, and has this ever happened to you before, and bring up all the problems of our society into this? Like, what am I supposed to do? What I mean, the same thing has happened to me when people are like, oh, my dad died. I'm like, that sucks. Or I lost my job. Oh no, what are you going to do? When I get, negative information is passed along, I commiserate. But if I can't do anything, like, how do I fix this? And maybe this is the part of a male female outlook thing, but I don't want to talk about issues in order to get it off my chest. I want to talk about issues in order to A, understand it, and B, do something about it. So I tend to read books like this and academic papers that talk about racism and see in them two separate movements. One movement says, here's a problem. Here's where racism manifests itself in our society in a scientific or in a economic way, and this is what we do to fix it. And I say, great, that's what we do to fix it. I support that. What do you want me to do? What do I vote for? What do I say to fix this? And there's another viewpoint which says, which focuses on all the emotion. This is bad. This is terrible. This is horrible. People are guilty of this. How can people not care about this? How can people be so callous and rude? And I'm going, yeah, people suck sometimes. People suck a lot of the times. I don't know how to fix people. That's my own response there. Is like, because to talk about racism with your white friend, as it is, seems like always a negative speech, and there are ways to do it positively. I think there is a show. I think it involves like Scarlett Johansson's husband or something, I think, where it's a black guy and a white guy, and they're like writing racist jokes for each other, and they're laughing about it horribly, and the audience is laughing and whatnot, right? So this is racism in a positive sense, as bad as that sounds, right? Right, but it's using these racist stereotypes and ideas we have and saying, okay, let's use these to induce laughter. Let's use these to induce a feeling of absurdity. Let's use these to enter into a discussion about racism, which includes all the stereotypes, not only, that one side is bad and one side is good. But I think that's very hard to find. Discussion about racism which are positive or neutral, as opposed to discussing racism with your friends in a way that is not negative, is difficult, I feel. And perhaps that's maybe partially what she's getting at. Like, how do you have a neutral stance when discussing racism, right? Okay, so basically, how do you discuss black, white, racist history in the United States without white guilt or black victimhood? How do you do it in a very, we're coming to this as individuals we're coming to this as honesty. We're coming to this as trying to figure things out. And that is a complexity which I'm not quite sure to get at yet, because you can definitely come at it from a black victimhood. I'm angry at all whitey. And you can definitely come at it from a white guilthood. Oh my gosh, the white people have done so much terrible things. I benefit in such a ways. I should make amends. You know, I should demonstrate how bad I feel about this. I'm going, well, both of those are ways to act, yes, but I tend to be, for all my criticisms, a more positive looking person. Like, what can we do? What action can we take? How, if we're discussing this, then it is for a purpose. I mean, I'm part of the reason I'm involved in this is to stand up and speak about something, right? To improve my own faults and failures by speaking about an issue which is fraught with complexities and possible peril. By pretending to be brave, by getting some of the ideas out of my head. And by getting some of the ideas out of my head, I am achieving the goal itself. But also, what I'm doing is coming to a greater, attempting to come to a greater understanding of my own prejudices and beliefs and actions, as well as like the point of view that this person has, that the writer has about white frailty, and how her experiences reflect upon the interactions with racism and movements. And, you know, and I think, for example, that I am at least partially projecting what she says here based on things I've heard other people say who are very, very white progressive, very upset about all the poor black folk that they must help, and that we must speak about racism in the correct way and always demonstrate that white is bad. And it's very tiring sometimes. Like, I need some positives here. I need some funny racist jokes, is what I'm saying. In order to feel that there is an actual discussion being had instead of a performative negativity. Okay. And there's a little part here which I think is total BS. Complete BS. Utter and complete. Okay. It says, well, everyone of every race holds prejudice and can discriminate against someone of another race. In the U.S. and other white/settler nations, only white people are in the position to oppress people of color collectively and throughout the whole of society. This claim defines racism as a fluid dynamic that changes direction according to each group's ratio in a given space. While a white person may have been picked on, even mercilessly, by being in the numerical minority in a specific context, the individual was experiencing race prejudice and discrimination, not racism. This distinction is not meant to minimize the white person's experience, but aims to clarify and to prevent rendering the terms interchangeable and thus meaningless. Okay, so she's starting with the truth and ending with a mistake. Okay. In the U.S. and other white-settler nations, only white people are in the position to oppress people of color collectively and throughout the whole of society. In the huge expanse of the entire United States of America, right, it is, I think, very clear that white culture is the dominant culture. White culture, as in, you know, old-timey American culture here, is the dominant way of understanding the issues of the nation, the dominant method of speaking about the issues of the nation, the dominant idea and viewpoint of good and bad. And that is something which we can definitely call racism in many ways. Okay? But that claim is then used to say that white people cannot experience racism, and that is total BS. We're looking at structural and individual racism, right? So structural racism, with structural racism, she has half a point. Okay? that as a white person, you are definitely not oppressed by the structure, right? You are not stopped by cops because you're driving well white. You are not given a harsher sentence by a judge because you were white. Okay? So yes, in the situations you are benefiting from the white culture in a structural sense. But you can also be in trouble in other structures, okay? If you go to a school where you are in, if you go to a majority black school where you are a white minority, then you can experience discrimination. You can experience racism. You know, I've talked to people to whom this has happened, right? Who have explained their issues with racism from the opposite direction. It is rarer. It is less likely. It does not happen as often. Right? It is usually not in a system-wide sense where it affects every aspect of their daily lives. But it can most definitively happen in small areas, right? In workplaces, in schools. In certain, in certain relationships. So yeah, structural racism on a national level is white racism, and white people don't experience discrimination in that sense. It does not mean that they cannot experience discrimination in other areas and during other times. Okay? And part of this can be the example of how do you find positiveness in whiteness? Well, with the anti-racist viewpoint it's talking about here, you cannot, right? The definition of whiteness is the oppressor. I'm going, okay, the oppressor is bad, yes. But now you're lumping in all white folk into the oppressor? And I'm going, okay, what do you mean by white folk? Oh, I mean this type of culture or that veneration of a certain person. Or the idea that race shouldn't matter. I'm going, whoa. Again, complexities. You can say that most of what's going on here is bad. That does not mean that everything is bad, right? That does not mean that the entire culture, the entire United States, for the entirety of its existence, was the work of the devil whole and completely. No. Yeah, bunch of slaves. At the beginning of the nation, yes, mistakes were made, but we had a civil war. There was this movement, there was this idea which said slavery is bad and fought against it, okay? And so that it also is part of our history. Yes, the bit of white European culture and philosophy which says individuals are what we should be seen as. We are an individual, and who we are as a singular person is so much more important than who we are in a social sense. Can reinforce social norms that oppress. But it can also be used as an individual to deny social pressure. To say the world is in such and such a way, but I like a black girl, and I'm going to marry the black girl. Doesn't matter that I'm getting disowned by my family. I love her, right? And that is individualism as well. That is something positive that can be found there. It's like power, science, magic, right? It's how you use it. And there have been parts of the world there have been parts of the system used badly. There have been parts of the system used well. And we want to do it well and well and well. And we want to dismantle the bad parts of our nation and increase the good parts. I guess I have the opinion that if you're going to burn the world down, you better have some idea of what you want to replace it. If you're going to destroy a system, you better have some idea of how to build a new system. If you're just anti everything anti-movement of whatever type, then you will end up destroying yourself. You will end up becoming your own demon, your own devil, right? And this is a problem with any anti-establishment movement. This is something that anti-racism needs to figure out. What is the goal? What is the point? Where do you end up at, right? Because if I want to destroy the racist power structure, what replaces it? What is life like after whiteness and blackness are gone? Okay. And then also, of course, we can have individual racism, which most certainly and 100% people can experience. The first bit of racism I ever remember experiencing was in middle school, in, I don't know, 7th or 8th grade or something, when a teacher, I had gotten into a fight with these two kids earlier in the day. And this teacher came by and was like, these two kids said that you would call them the N-word. And I looked at the teacher and was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. I did not say that. I know. And he's like, okay, I believe you. And he walked away. I'm like, okay. Then we enter into discussions in the modern day looking back at that, right? Okay, is it because I was white that he believed me, or because I was a nerd, or because the two were known troublemakers, or because, I'm known for being the quiet kid who reads a book and, they're not, or it was because they've lied to him before and I never have, because he knew him but he didn't know me. Like what's the whole dynamic here? How much was race? How much was individualism and whatnot? I mean, that has never happened to me since, and I have no idea who the kids were. But that is an individual racism you can experience. At work, you have experienced this, and at times, I've in situations where I've been accused of being racist, and I'm like, look, dude, I'm not racist against you. You're a crackhead. I don't know what to tell you. There are like 7 holes in your shirt, and you haven't bathed in a week. I am not renting you a room. That's an issue. Okay. But okay. So this, she says here, well, a white person may have been picked on, even mercilessly. The individual was experiencing race prejudice and discrimination, not racism. Okay. That is racism. That is individual racism. That is racism that is possible because of the local structure they find themselves in. She is talking about racism on a national level as if that is the only racism that ever exists and nothing else is relevant. And no. Individual people make up the entire system. Individual things happen to individual people. And there's this claim used that I've heard before that, hey, you're white, so you can never have suffered from racism. Or I am black, and so I cannot be racist. And I'm like, no. You can be black and racist. 100%. You can be white and have suffered from racism. 100%. It's rarer in each case, I'll admit, but it happens. And it's just something that so annoys me. It's like this is the invalidation of my own experience. Like, this is the invalidation of my own sight. When I hear my friend complain that his relatives said he wasn't black enough, then I'm going, that's black racism right there. Like, what else do you want me to call it? And then I hear people honestly say, and they stand up and they believe I'm black, so I cannot be racist. And I'm like, no. That ain't how that works, sister. And the reason they have that view is this anti-racist view, right? Is this anti-structural view, which says we are anti-system, we are against the white system, and so we must be good because we were against that. I'm going, okay, you can be... How do I explain? The enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, right? I can be against revolutionary France. I can be against the monarchy. But that does not mean I'm for Robespierre and the terror, right? I can say I am against the monarchy, but that does not mean I am for Napoleon, right? In England, I can be against the monarchy, but that does not mean I am for the anarchists. I can be anti-Republican or anti-Democrat, but that does not mean I am pro-Republican or pro-Democrat. I can be in the Green Party. I can be in some other viewpoint that I hold myself, right? But it is important to understand, again, that when the anti-racist book here and movement is talking about racism, what they are trying to say is structural racism. But because it is individual talks we have with individuals, what they end up practically saying and practically expressing themselves as, practically being understood as many times, is individual racism. And then denying that individual racism exists, and denying that local power structures exist. And I'm like, yeah, you don't become your enemy, right? Don't do what your enemy, if you're saying that they're focusing on intentions over actions, do that, right? What you criticize your enemy for, make sure you also criticize yourself for, and make sure you do not fall into the same trap of attacking the fascists by becoming fascists yourselves, right? Of attacking a system by becoming the system that replaces it, but worse. Okay. And so, with this view that racism is structural, she says a racism-free upbringing is not possible because racism is a social system embedded in the culture and its institutions. We are born in the system and have no say in whether we will be affected by it. Maybe whether we are affected by it, but whether we can affect it is entirely different, right? We can change the system. We can challenge the system. And she's trying to get at this, but my advice would be, for myself at least, don't challenge the system by just making another system that repeats the same mistakes. Okay. And what it can be dangerous to involve yourself in discussions about racism or anti-racism in exactly the same way. You can talk to a racist and you say, I don't think all black people are bad. And then they get mad at that because they feel threatened by the rise of black power or whatnot. And then so they start focusing on you and seeing you as the enemy. The same thing can happen with anti-racism. When they start saying all white people are bad and guilty, and I say, it's more complicated than that. Or what they say, we are controlled, we must see the world through race. And I say, I don't think we have to see the world through race entirely, right? Then I can be attacked and seen as the enemy because I disagree with them. Or like, I can agree partially and disagree partially. I do not have to follow 100% of your viewpoint to agree that you have valid points, which I think should be discussed. And I have been trying to do that in the book here. And the way I react to the book by saying, I agree with parts of these and I disagree with parts of these. I have very strong opinions about some views, and in other areas, I understand what you're saying and I agree with you. But what can definitely happen is this viewpoint that because I disagree with you about some minor issue, or I suppose I disagree with you about how powerful racism is, then I must be the enemy. And that does not, I am not the enemy because I disagree with you. And at the same time, I am not an idiot because I disagree with you. Because that has happened to me before in discussions with people about racism or classism or sexism. And then I say something, and then they say something, I disagree with them, and then they treat you like a baby. They treat you like an idiot, like a child. They're like, oh, I know you don't understand what I'm saying. You don't understand the import. You don't understand the history. And I'm out here saying, ma'am, I am a grown-ass person. I lived through the era. Like, you're talking to me about, you know, the reaction of America towards Middle Easterners after 9/11. And I'm like, I was alive then. Don't not speak to me. I was there when the magic was made. Sort of bit, you know? You know, or don't, or like they're talking about racism, about something about racism or classism, and I'm like, I grew up in this racist system you talk about, and in this classist system you talk about, and I understand how it affected me. I see with clear sight. Or they'll explain something to me, and I'll say, I understand what you mean. I understand why you think that way, but you are wrong. And then their response, sometimes the response is angry. And that's understandable, right? I'm challenging them. How dare you? Sometimes the response is to give up. Okay, I can't. It's not even worth talking to you. But sometimes the response is so insulting because it seeks to infantilize their opponents. It's when a group or with a view stands in their high horse and says, I have the truth. I am the chosen of God. You know, I am the one with the pure spirit of knowledge. And if you do not understand this, then it's because of your own blindness. I'm going, no. I can see clearly and yet still disagree with you. There are, right? So like if I'm talking to people and people are listening to me and I start saying something which they think is wrong. If I start saying things which you disagree with, and I start saying things which the viewer of this video feels strongly about that I have misunderstood or misinterpreted, then go ahead and say something, tell me. And I will attempt to understand. And in many cases, I will understand, but I will still disagree with you. Because I feel that as I stand here, I have a history which I have acknowledged. I have a self-identity which I have challenged and forged in fires of my own. I'm not complete. I am not perfect. I do not know everything. I make mistakes every single day. And half the things I say here are probably wrong. But in half the things I say here, I would not be surprised if I was right. Okay. Okay, yeah, I've gone over this before. But she says, you know, the idea that talking about racism itself, the idea that talking about racism is itself racist has always struck me as odd. No, it's not odd at all. That is not an odd view at all. Talking about racism is not itself racist. Yes. Talking about race is itself racist. And so talking about racism in a particular area is itself racist, but it is racist in the sense that it sees the world through a racist lens. This does not mean racist in the sense that it is anti-racism. This does not mean racist in the sense that the Southern slaveholders were. This means racist in the sense that the world has a color of race. And so the reason this is in trouble comes from linguistic complications. So I'm using racism and anti-racism, but perhaps I should use something like anti-racism and God, what would I use? Discrimination, yeah. Anti-racism and discrimination. If I've been talking about racism, anti-racism, and unracism, but perhaps I should say unracism, anti-racism, and discrimination. And then discrimination and anti-racism are on a line which is racist, that is opposite from the angle of unracist. Maybe a better way to demonstrate the triangle. In order to distinguish racism from racial discrimination. Because anti-racist is racism in that it sees the world through a racist lens, but it is ideally not racial discrimination. Okay. What time? Okay. Okay, now we get into some of the white viewpoint, right? Of how she thinks we should deal with or talk about racism, or how we should see racism. And what she's trying to do here is she's saying she's saying that the common viewpoint among the white Europeans in America, of white people, the people of European descent, intellectually in America, generally trend towards this unracist viewpoint, right? This idea that race is, we should not see race. That is the ideal. Race should disappear as a piece of the fabric of our nation. And she's saying, well, I think she's trying to say, at least, in order to do that, we need to first acknowledge race so that we can fix it. We have to acknowledge the problem so that we can fix it. And the problem was not fixed as if by magic during the Civil Rights era. It still affects us today. So how do we start doing that? Well, she says, start talking about whiteness. Start talking about the idea that I or you are of the white race. And if we are of the white race, then how does that affect us? Right? Instead of whiteness as blindness, have whiteness as a color itself. To challenge the ideologies of racism, such as individualism and colorblindness, we as white people must suspend our perception of ourselves as unique and/or outside race. We need to discuss white people as a group, even if doing so jars us, in order to disrupt our unracialized identities. And that's as clear as you can get there. Instead of an unracial identity, she says, well, we're going to have a racial identity. And denying your racial identity is in itself bad. And I'm going, denying your racial identity may in itself be unproductive in certain ways, but that is not necessarily bad. It is my reply here. At the same time, I understand what she's saying, right? In order to dismantle the structure, you have to see the structure. In order to undo the problem, you have to be able to see the problem. In order to fix the issue, you have to be able to speak about the issue. If whiteness and blackness is an issue, well, let us talk about them. Instead of standing there as the white person saying, look, I don't see race, and race isn't important, and let's focus on class instead and pretend racism doesn't exist. Perhaps what we should do instead is go, yeah, okay, I see what you mean. White is a race. You're talking about white people, and I understand that to mean me, or I understand that to be a certain subset of society, or I understand white people to be, to me, a certain group. And the fact that I understand what you mean when you say whiteness indicates to me that I understand whiteness as a racial group instead of just people. And because we can talk about black folk, and that makes sense. And we can talk about white folk, and it makes sense. But we sure as hell seem to talk a lot more about black folk than we do about white folk. And that dichotomy there may be an issue, right? What we talk about, like the negative stereotypes and the positive stereotypes of black folk. Well, what about the negative and positive stereotypes of white folk, right? How does that enter into our discussion? Okay, then she says, we see anti-black sentiment. Okay, oh, no, okay, let me go back. Okay, so she says, in this chapter, I will address the uniquely anti-black sentiment integral to white identity. In doing so, I do not wish to minimize the racism that other groups of color experience. However, I believe that in the white mind, black people are the ultimate racial other, and we must grapple with this relationship for as a foundational aspect of the racial socialization underlying white frailty. What she's talking about is, in America, black people used to be slaves. And so there is a dialogue which has been going on for 300 years at least about how we deal with that fact, right? How do we talk among ourselves about our sordid history? You know, you can go back and you can see anti and pro-abolitionist movements for hundreds of years. You can see anti-discrimination movements for hundreds of years. You can see racial discrimination movements for hundreds of years. The social fabric of the American society is in many ways, especially since the civil rights movement, even today, still wrapped up and trapped in this black-white history, because she's talking about American racism. I want to make that very clear. When she's talking about racism, when the entire anti-racist system is talking about racism that we hear, they are talking about American-style racism. And this is a discussion I had with a teacher once. And my feelings on this, I think, are very clear. That the issues I've seen with that racism have been or can be repeated anywhere on the planet, because they are issues of culture and race, right? They're issues of groups of people. And there are all sorts of countries on this world where the single country comprises different tribes, or the single country comprises different types of classes. And then there is discrimination within those classes or between those tribes, which mirrors almost exactly the actions of racism in the United States. In the United States, it takes this form of black and white as the two most obvious bits. But there are other bits, right? There's Native American, there's Asian, there's different types of Asian within there. There's different within the Native American bit. There's racial issues between different tribes there, or between different mixtures and whatnot. Right, there are complex histories everywhere on this planet which mirror exactly the problems we talk about with racism. And there is this tendency to think of racism as special. It is not. Racism has existed in various ways for the entirety of human history. Today, in the American way, color of skin takes on a vast importance for why that is the case, right? But the same issues and problems are repeated in other places, in other areas of the world. Whether you're talking, the untouchable classes in Japan, or you end up talking about any empire on the planet which refused to grant citizenship to certain of its subjects. If you're talking to, you can talk about like the differences between tribes in Afghanistan, or differences between ethnic groups in Syria, and you can say, well, why are there problems arising today? One ethnic group is in charge, and then, or you can talk about the Balkans. Whatnot? Why are these two ethnic groups trying to kill each other all the time? What is the history there? You can talk about names. Well, Greece and North Macedonia. Well, Greece claims the name of Macedonia because it has to do with Alexander the Great. But North Macedonia also says, hey, that's the name we use. And what's the history here? And there's tensions going on. And it doesn't always erupt into violence. Sometimes it's just words. Sometimes it's just stopping people from joining the EU until this issue gets resolved. But other times it is in the middle of a country, and this one group is killing, the Tutsis and the Hutus are killing one another. And I may not be able to tell the difference whatsoever. I might not know the history there. But it is the same exact movement. America does have its own specificities, its own reality, its own unique history, where skin color and this slavery history comes into play, which does make it unique. But do not pretend I feel that American racism is either special or the only way in which to view racism, the only way in which to view a classism or a sexism or anything like this. These are struggles of power. These are struggles of identity, not just black and white. It can be green and blue, or long nose, short nose, for all we know. And so there's this idea, that American racism is the center of the anti-racist world, and I'm going, there are things to learn from other places, right? There are issues we talk about today that we stand here and we go, oh, I don't know how we're going to solve that. Well, let's look at some place where they had a very similar issue between ethnic groups, and they did solve it. Or you're going, well, I don't know if this is a problem. Well, let me show you some other country here where they didn't think there was a problem between these two ethnic groups, and then there was. And then somebody started talking about how this group or another was going to do something terrible, or how they were taking all your jobs, and it riled up the entire country. And then there was a civil war, right? Or, hey, there's a history of this ethnic group tends to be herders and sheep herders in the hills, and this ethnic group tends to be in the cities and whatnot. That's something I tend to feel strongly about. I'm like, look, we live in a complex world where everything is like everything else, and everything is also nothing like anything else. And how do we get at that? So she says, in the white mind, black people are the ultimate racial other. She means in the American racist mind, not in any other section. So when I stop talking about black and white here, but I'm doing that because I'm inured in the American outlook, and I think that by saying this to be understandable, I could just as easily have said the green and the blues. I just could have easily said the orange and the purples, and everything I have to say could have gotten across in the same way. I could have easily said the type Ds and the type Js. I could have easily said the braided and the unbraided, the long hairs and the short hairs, the big nose and the small noses, the 4 fingers and the 5 fingers. If you would start talking about aliens, and the same ideas gets in there. The rich and the poor, right? The male and the female. Oh, it's differences between groups that we're trying to deal with. And not racism is only one aspect of the interconnected complexities of issues we have to deal with. And American racism is only one type of racism in the world. Okay. And this I thought was kind of interesting. She says, we see anti-black sentiment in the immediate rejoinder to Black Lives Matter, that all lives matter, that blue lives matter, and in the absurdly false comparison between the white nationalist and alt-white movement with the Black Panther Party of the 1960s. We see anti-blackness in how much more harshly we criticize blacks by every measure. We see it in the President of the United States positioning the avowed white supremacist neo-Nazis marching openly in the streets as equal in character to the people protesting them. So this goes back to the beginning, how do we respond to movements? How do we respond to two groups arguing against each other? And she's saying that what we tend to do is vilify the black group and forgive the white group. And to an extent, I think this is definitely the case. I think that if you look at the history of the United States, and especially how media and politics act, we tend to do exactly what she says we do, and view the anti-establishmentarian movements, which are represented by the black community, or which focus on racial issues as more negatively understood, or more negatively treated with than like neo-Nazis. I think that the general sense seems to be that the neo-Nazis are a hate group, and there is no use talking with them because they're a hate group who hate people. And how do you even have a conversation with that? Let them do their hate, and eventually they'll die off. if neo-Nazis are a hate group, well, then you let them die on the vine, sort of bit. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to attack them, because if you attack them, all you're doing is giving them a focus. It's bringing them into the news. And if you wanted to do the same thing for like Black Lives Matter, then you would not focus on them. You would not bring them into the news. You would not report on all the violence they're doing. You would let them die on the vine. Let them be ignored. But by talking about them, you are doing the opposite. You're bringing more attention to them. I think that's a change we have seen in our American history, is that the more negative attention given to like the Black Panther movement, the more popular similar ideas become embedded in the public consciousness. But particularly here, this bit is interesting, right? You have an you say have a movement. You have a movement, Black Lives Matter, which is saying black people are killed more often by the police than they should be. That could be really misinterpreted as a statement. Black people are killed more often by the police than they would be if they were treated the same as white folk. Black folk are killed more often by the police than they would be if the comparative numbers of shooting incidents were treated the same. Yeah, something in there is how you would speak it, I say. And then you have others. Then you have an immediate rejoinder to the Black Lives Movement saying, "Well, blue lives matter." I'm like, and you're like, yeah, but police are sure as hell killed less often by black folk or white folk or green folk than black folk are by police, right? And so that is an issue of pointing out a problem and of using a truth to cover a issue, right? Someone says Black Lives Matter, and there's another protest that says Blue Lives Matter. Well, the intention, if we have the positive outlook of that intention, is they're trying to say that police lives matter as well. But the activity of that is often to distract from the Black Lives Matter movement. So I do tend to agree with her here. We do this in America. And so how do we discuss that? How do we deal with that, right? How do you hold both that Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter? Because they do. And obviously they do, but what do we as people, in what activities do we engage in regarding that? Do you say, yeah, Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, and then you go to the Black Lives Matter protest? Or do you choose between the protests? You go to either the Black Lives Matter or the Blue Lives Matter protest? How much energy or do you have to give? How much money is donated? Does Blue Lives Matter as a movement take away resources from Black Lives Matter as a movement? Because that's where the real question is. If you have a counter movement, or you have a copycat movement, then does that expand the issue, or does that distract away from an issue? And that's a question I think to ask ourselves when we see these events happening. Why? How do I act when there are so many good movements to which I should support? How do I spend my time and energy when there are so many charities I could give to? You make a choice. And, like if there was only one charity in the United States, if one charity did everything, and you were like, hey, if I gave to charity, and you meant like the charity Abacababa, I don't know, and that was the national charity. Then everything would be simple, right? But when you have 10,000 charities, then what seems to happen, or what it seems could happen, is these charities begin to compete with each other for donations, and that, I think, would tend to diminish the donations that each individual charity gets. But the question I have is, does that increase the total amount of donations? If you have 10,000 charities all vying, because theoretically there should be a competition for effective means here, like the effective messaging and effective advertisement of eliciting donations, which should induce better advertising and better abilities to elicit donations, which should lead to more donations overall. Okay. Well, I'm basically saying here, when she says, we see anti-black sentiment in the immediate rejoinder to Black Lives Matter, that all lives matter, that blue lives matter. I see what she means. I tend to agree with her that the effect of those is to diminish the message of the first movement there. It dilutes this message and this information of horribleness with many horriblenesses. All lives matter. Well, yes, but perhaps we should focus on some of these lives first and improve that situation first before we get to the rest of them, because one group is obviously suffering more than the others. Right? If you're already at 99% and this other group is at 66%, we could focus more of our energies on the 66% group and get them up to 80% before we switch back to the 99%. But there might also, I think, be a reaction that she's not talking about here, in that anti-racist sentiment being anti-systematic sentiment, being anti-establishment sentiment. The Black Lives Matter movement can also be understood as an anti-police movement, I think. And so the question becomes, is Black Lives Matter anti-police or pro-reform police? Because those may look, because to us on the outside, it may look the same. They want to change something about the police, but do they want to dismantle the police? Do they dislike the police? Do they hate the police? Do they think that policing itself is a bad idea, or do they say that no, the policing is done wrong? We need to fix policing. So I do wonder how much the rejoinder "Blue Lives Matter" is used as a statement to say, we need to continue pro-police changes and ignore changes to the police which would benefit black folk. Does Blue Lives Matter, is that trying to say, or is it effectively saying that there are pro-police changes we should make in society? Or Black Lives Matter is saying there are pro-black changes we should make in the police system? Or is it police system is bad? Because those are two different ideas. One is positive, building something up. One is tearing everything down. But then we'd have to get to the specifics of that era where Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter was a big movement, and I don't remember it too clearly at the moment. Okay. Okay. She says, Coates refers to white people as dreamers in the dream, falsely believing they are actually white. I take this to mean that whites can only be white if someone is not white. If someone is the opposite of white, white is a false identity, an identity of false superiority. Well, then you run into a problem there. If I identify as white, then where do I go from there? Right? If people tell me I'm white, and they tell me at the same time, white is a false identity, an identity of false superiority. In that sense, whiteness isn't real. I mean, how am I supposed to interpret that? If someone says, you are white, and whiteness is false identity, and whiteness is not real. Okay. So I'm white, but whiteness isn't real. Are you saying that you're mistaken and I'm not white? Are you saying that I'm not real? Like what kind of dialogue are you supposed to have there? You're white, whiteness isn't real. You're white is a false superiority. So I'm white, but I'm white, but being white is a lie. So I'm a lie. My position in this society is a lie. My identity as an American is a lie. I mean, to what extent? Yes, there are falsities. Yes, there are mistakes. Yes, there are unfairnesses. Yes, there are issues to fix. But painting someone in a color, black or white, destroys nuance. It threatens to bury a person under the name of a group, under the viewpoint of a certain type of person who says, you are of this race, and by being part of that race, you are supporting evil. I'm like, okay. And then, but elsewhere she says, like, you cannot stop being white. I'm like, how the hell am I supposed to? Okay. So there's this gist, right? The statement here as regards whiteness is, and she says, okay, Carl Anderson in her book, White Rage, argues that the trigger for white rage inevitably is black advancement. No. It is not necessarily black advancement. White rage can also be a reaction to the statement, to what she has been claiming out this entire time, right? Okay. We are born, the claim in the book about whiteness is, we are born in a racist society. We cannot help but be racial. But be racial. We must be a race in our society. So a person who is of the white race must be of the white race. They cannot not be white. Okay? White is a false identity, a false superiority. Whiteness isn't real. So a person must be white. They cannot help but be white. Whiteness is bad. Whiteness is false. Right? The message there is that you are white and therefore you are bad. Full stop. And you cannot be anything but white and bad. Therefore you are bad. That's the sort of the response, which I think the people who speak like this just do not understand what they are saying. Right? If white is bad, and I am white, and I can stop being white, that is fine. Right? That works. You are bad. I'm bad. I'm doing something bad. I can be good. Great. If whiteness cannot be escaped, but I do not have to be white. If whiteness can't be escaped, but I don't have to be white, then that's fine, right? Hey, I was born and some parts of my identity are white, but I myself am not the race of whiteness. I myself am only partially related to whiteness, which is bad. Right, but to paint with a brush, to stand up and say, I'm insulting you, and I am calling you evil and bad and a false superiority and white, and you cannot escape being white. You must be white. You must feel guilt. You must be bad. You were born a horrible person in our society, and it was through no fault of your own that you must explain how terrible you are. I'm like, oh my God. How do you stand there and it's like saying to someone, you are black and you were born black and black is bad and you cannot escape ever being black. I mean, it's just racism in the opposite direction. And that's part of the rage that happens when we are labeled as something. When we are told that we are something and we must be something, we will never, ever be anything but that something that another person has labeled us and named us and called us. So no, if whiteness exists and whiteness is a false identity, an identity of false superiority, then I do not have to be white. Okay, then I completely and totally deny that I have this original sin. And you get to hear something in this about Nietzsche, right? With the Christian theology and whatnot. The idea of original sin, the idea that you must suffer for how you have been born, the idea that, we are horrible beings who can only be saved by absolution before God and confessing our sins. And that is what the statement, right? That is the message sent by the idea about white in this book, that you are white, you are born white, you must be white, you cannot escape being white, and white is bad in all ways. I'm like, okay, you have to tear that idea apart. You have to say whiteness is not all bad, or you have to say whiteness can be changed, or you have to say you don't have to be white, or you have to say you can stop being white. Right? You have to say that you are labeled as white and you have white viewpoints, but you can escape that label. You can deny that label. You can become something else, and not by admitting your sins and your faults and accepting the judgment of society or the church or God or the movement, by being yourself, by changing who you are and how you act and the way you move and create in the system. But there has to be a way out of the trap. There has to be a way out of the trap. Here, she says, the dream is the perfect world, unpolluted by blacks. If whites are to construct this world, blacks must be separated through state violence, yet they still must exist, for the existence of blacks provides the needed other against which whites may rise. So, that means in order to destroy whiteness, you must also destroy blackness. Okay? So anti-racist sentiment at its heart is anti-white and anti-black. And that is what is to go on here. Okay? And if you pretend that you are only anti-white but not anti-black, then you will fail in your mission. You will fail to ever tear down the system because you will be reinforcing the system at every turn. And at the very best, the only thing you will do is replace black with white and make black the new white and white the new black. No, you have to be willing to destroy the positives and the negatives entirely. You have to be willing to say to someone, you do not have to be black. You do not have to be white. You can be African American. You can be of Scottish descent. You can be of Mexican descent. You can be half Chinese and half Swahili. Okay? You can be all these things without being white and black and being stuck in this dichotomy of torture. Right? This statement, thus, white identity depends in particular on the projection of inferiority onto blacks, and the oppression this inferior status justifies the white collective, then you can say the exact same thing. By definition of power structures where white is seen as the positive, and black is seen as a negative, you could say exactly the same thing. You could say exactly, thus black identity depends in particular on the projection of superiority onto whites and the oppression this status justifies. You have to do anti-racist sentiment to undo racism itself, not to undo discrimination, not to undo the system, not to be anti-system, but to be anti-racism itself. You have to destroy racism, black and white. You have to obliterate the system. You have to have, she says, white people as the dreamers in the dream. Well, we have to achieve a dream. We have to go for the dream. If white people are dreamers in the dream, falsely believing they're actually white, then black people are dreamers in the dream, falsely believing that they're actually black. And there is something standing in the way. There is the power structure standing in the way. Right? There is the history, there is the racial existence and movements and effects and results and ways of speaking and issues we have today that stand in the way of this dream dissolving. So, yes, racism exists. Yes, whiteness exists as the oppressive pull of the power structure, but in order to undo that, you have to undo the battery. Okay? Tear down the system and replace the system with something entirely different. When you are anti-racism, have a goal in mind. That's all I'm saying, is that when you have an anti-racist viewpoint and you want to move in an anti-racist direction, then tell me what your goal is. Tell me what your ideal is. Don't simply stand there and tell me how something is bad and bad and bad and bad. No, tell me the good. Show me the positive. Show me the beautiful, amazing, dreamlike world pulled into here. Show me heaven on earth. Don't show me hell on earth. I get enough hell in my daily life. I get enough hell in my interactions with human beings. I get enough hell inside my own bloody head. Show me a vision of heaven at least. And that's what is missing from this book. That is what is missing from these statements about whiteness, is a better world. That is what, at the very least, Martin Luther King had with his I Have a Dream speech. He had a vision of a better world. And there are ways in which to reach that. There are certainly anti-racist movements and anti-racist actions in this book that she mentions that I agree with, which help to achieve Martin Luther King's dream. But if you ignore that I Have a Dream speech, if you say he was wrong, then I think that is a mistake. I think that is a misunderstanding of the speech and the idea and the hope inherent in the anti-racist movement. Okay. He says, it is not the mere presence of black people that is the problem. Rather, it is blackness with ambition, with drive, with purpose, with aspirations, and with demands for full and equal citizenship. It is blackness that refuses to accept subjugation, to give up. Yes, exactly. If black is seen as negative, in order to destroy blackness, you must rise. You must say, I am equal. I have my own beauty and my own history and my own glory and my own positivity. I shall be treated in an equal fashion. Right? So you don't just drag whiteness down, right? You drag blackness up. And that is what is important here. I think perhaps there's another book I need to read Okay, there's another book here, because this is about white frailty. This is all about white guilt and what you do with the whiteness. But what do you do with blackness? How do you bring up the negative? How do you infuse a society with a racial view of ambition, drive, purpose, aspirations, and a wish, an ardent, full wish for full and equal citizenship? How do you take the United States and give it hope that we can do better, and then give it a roadmap and say, this is what you do in order to be better, without sticking people in a race and saying you have to be this, and that this type of race or that type of viewpoint or that type of system is always bad? How do we improve bit by bit? How do we draw a road to a better world? And that is the book I am missing. That is the book I am not reading here. Okay. So I'll find another book that hopefully starts with that, some sort of I don't know, Black Pride, Malcolm X thingamajig here. But for now, we'll continue this next time, and I will complete it next time, because I believe I'm just starting to rant at this point about the same ideas over and over again. And it is also 2 a.m. when I'm doing this, just about. So I'll do part 4 next time and finish that, and then move on to a different book. And in a few weeks or a month, I'll find the book I'm missing and try to understand that there.